All right, let's get into one of the most incredible power struggles in all of history. For about 85 years, England was literally torn in two by this massive conflict, the king on one side and the people's representatives on the other. It started as a war of ideas, but it ended up as a brutal civil war, and it would completely change what it even means to be a modern country.
And at the heart of it all was this one simple question. Who gets the final say? Is it the king, who says he was chosen by God, or is it Parliament, chosen by the people? For the better part of a century, that was probably the most dangerous question you could ask in England. And the answer they came up with? Well, it shaped the world that you and I live in today.
So our story really kicks off in 1603. A new royal family, the Stuarts, comes to power. King James I travels down from Scotland to take the English throne, and he brings this very radical idea with him about how much power a king should have.
And look, this wasn't just some offhand comment. James actually wrote a book about it, laying out his whole philosophy. He basically argued that since he was king, he could make any law he wanted, and he was the master of every single person in the kingdom. He even claimed a king might put to death whom he pleased. I mean, can you imagine hearing that from your new leader? This whole concept has a name, the divine right of kings. And the logic, if you can call it that, goes something like this. The king is God's guy on earth. So that means he only has to answer to God, not to Parliament, not to the people, and certainly not to the law. In fact, he is the law. And that one idea right there is the spark that lights the fuse for everything that's about to happen. So when James's son, Charles I, gets the crown in 1625, he doesn't just inherit the throne, he inherits his dad's whole attitude. And the thing is, he was even less willing to compromise. The conflict was about to go from bad to worse.
And here he is, Charles I. He definitely looked the part of a king who thought he was all-powerful, and right away he started clashing with Parliament, especially about money. Whenever they wouldn't give him the cash he wanted, he'd just find his own ways to get it, often illegally, like forcing his own subjects to give him loans.
Well, Parliament was not about to take that lying down. In 1628, they fought back with this huge document called the Petition of Right. It was basically them drawing a line in the sand, telling the king, look, you can't force people to give you money without our say-so, and you can't just toss people in jail for no good reason. They were trying to force Charles to admit that even the king had to follow the rules. So what was Charles's response to that? Well, his thinking was pretty simple. If you can't work with Parliament, just get rid of it. He reluctantly signed the petition, but then he immediately dissolved Parliament and decided he was just going to rule all by himself. And for the next 11 years, a period people later called the 11 Years' Tyranny, there was no Parliament in England at all. As you can guess, the tension was just simmering.
And by 1642, that simmering pot just boiled over. All these deep disagreements over politics and religion, they finally exploded into open war. The argument over who should rule the country wasn't going to be settled with words anymore. It was going to be settled on the battlefield. The entire country was split right down the middle. On one side, you had the Cavaliers, the Royalists. These were mostly the aristocrats, often Catholics, and they were all in on the king's divine right to rule. And on the other side, you had the Roundheads, the parliamentarians. They were mostly Puritans, merchants, and folks from the towns who were convinced that Parliament should be the one in charge.
But the Roundheads had a secret weapon. This guy, Oliver Cromwell. He started out as a simple country gentleman and a member of Parliament, but he turned out to be an absolute military genius. He whipped the parliamentary army into shape, creating this incredibly disciplined fighting force called the New Model Army. And with them, he started to turn the tide of the entire war.
And for the king, things just fell apart with shocking speed. The war kicks off in 42. Just 4 years later, he's been defeated and is a prisoner. By 1648, Cromwell's army gets fed up with politicians who are soft on the king, so they march into Parliament and physically kick out anyone who supports him. And all of that leads to the unthinkable climax just 1 year later. On January 30th, 1649, King Charles I was walked out onto a stage built right in front of his own palace, and he was publicly beheaded. This was absolutely world-changing. Nothing like this had ever happened before. A European king put on trial and executed by his own subjects. The whole idea of the divine right of kings, it died right there with him on that scaffold. So, what happens when you actually get rid of a king? For the next 11 years, England was about to find out. The nation went all in on this radical experiment, declaring itself a commonwealth, basically a republic. So in this new commonwealth, there was no king, no fancy House of Lords. But let's be real.
the power wasn't really with the people. It was with one man, Oliver Cromwell, the guy in charge of the army. He brutally crushed rebellions in Ireland and Scotland, and by 1653, they gave him the title Lord Protector. He was basically a king in everything but name. But this whole kingless experiment, it didn't last. After Cromwell died, his son just couldn't hold on to power. People were tired of the harsh military rule. So in a wild turn of events, in 1660, England decided to just undo the whole thing. They invited the executed king's son, Charles II, to come back from exile and be king. The monarchy was back.
Now, you'd think that would be the end of it, right? But the Stuarts, they weren't quite done. Decades later, another Stuart king, James II, would make one last, dramatic grab for absolute power, and that would trigger the final showdown in this long, long struggle. So, when Charles II's brother, James II, took the throne, it was a crisis waiting to happen. He was openly Catholic in a fiercely Protestant country, and he started acting just like his father, Charles I, ignoring Parliament, claiming he could do whatever he wanted. The final straw came when his Catholic wife had a son. Suddenly, the country was terrified of a permanent Catholic dynasty.
But this time, there wasn't going to be another civil war. Parliament acted, and they acted fast. A group of Protestant nobles secretly invited the Dutch prince, William of Orange, who happened to be married to James's Protestant daughter, Mary, to invade England. When William's army landed in 1688, James's support just evaporated. His own army abandoned him, and he ran off to France. Parliament then did something incredible. They declared the throne was empty, and they offered the crown to William and Mary together.
But they didn't just give them the crown. Oh no, they made their new king and queen sign a contract first. This was the ultimate victory. The 1689 Bill of Rights wrote into law everything they had fought and died for. The king could no longer get rid of laws, raise taxes, or have an army unless Parliament agreed. The divine right of kings was officially and forever dead. Parliament was now in charge.
And if you want to understand just how completely the tables had turned, get this. The very last time a British monarch even dared to veto a law passed by Parliament was the year 1707. That's it. For over 300 years since then, what Parliament says goes. The power shift was total. It was complete. So why does all this matter? Well, this 85-year fight wasn't just about England. Its legacy is the very foundation of modern democracy all over the world, including right here in the United States. The idea that a government has to have limits, that it has to follow the rule of law, that it's accountable to the people's elected representatives, all of those core beliefs were forged in the fire of this conflict. So the next time you hear someone talk about checks and balances, you can remember this long, brutal fight between a king and his parliament.